Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry for the slight delay this afternoon. Thank you all for joining us today for the third installment of the 5-part webinar series, Everyone's a Fundraiser, Using Your Entire Staff in Your Development Plan. Today's webinar is co-presented by Suzanne Hilzer-Wiles, Vice President, and Farah Salim, Consulting Associate. Suzanne Hilzer-Wiles joined GG&A in 2011, bringing to the firm more than 15 years of experience in advancement, program building, and campaign planning and implementation. Prior to joining GG&A, Suzanne served as Vice Chancellor for Advancement at the University of North Carolina School of the Arts, where she was responsible for overseeing fundraising, communication, and marketing programs, including admissions marketing, alumni relations, and the press office for a conservatory. Suzanne's co-presenter, Farah Salim, joined GG&A in January 2012 after previously serving as the Executive Director for the Kidsium of Health and Science, an emerging children's museum in Springfield, Illinois. Suzanne and Farah have held development positions at nonprofit organizations, so they both understand the challenges of working in a nonprofit environment. The knowledge, experience, and advice they share with you today is not only informed by their current roles as consultants, but their previous experience as development professionals. Our presenters welcome any questions you have during today's session and will answer those questions in the time remaining at the end of the hour. To address a question to Suzanne and Farah, please use the chat function on the right-hand side of your screen. Select all participants from the drop-down menu and send us your questions. Any questions we do not answer today will be addressed in a follow-up message we send next week. We will send a recording of the session along with the presentation slides, as well as a short survey to gain your feedback. Thank you again for joining us today. I will now turn it over to Farah to get us started.
Thanks, Catherine. I also want to personally thank you all for joining us today for what we hope will be a very helpful presentation for you. And looking at the registration list with more than 120 of you who joined us, it's quite apparent that having a basic understanding of fundraising for non-development personnel is pretty important and obviously much needed. So we are especially delighted for all of you to join us, and hopefully you will arm yourself with some useful takeaways. Before we get started on making everyone a fundraiser, I wanted to remind both our newcomers and our repeat visitors that this presentation is one of 5 in GG&A's series called Getting Big Fundraising Results in Small Development Shops. This particular session is our third, and so at the end we'll provide a little bit more detail on the upcoming 2 webinars. The reason that we are so excited about presenting webinars is because we here at GG&A feel very privileged to work with some of the most successful fundraising nonprofit organizations in the world because we do have some international participants joining us. And we see that these webinars are very much needed and much desired to share what our consultants have learned along the way to help you all achieve your missions. So I strongly encourage you to visit our website after today's session, take a peek, and register at for our upcoming seminars. And so with that housekeeping, we will take a look at our agenda. Today, our time together will cover some of the basics of gelling all the people in your organization to basically coming together and getting those results for your mission and for funding. If you will notice, we have used a team analogy, so we appreciate your humor with us. And we find it very fitting because fundraising really is a team effort. There are players on the field and there are cheerleaders. So not only should people be promoting and cheering on your cause, but should also play a significant part of your development team, even if they're not frontline fundraisers. So we will go through each of these 4 sections, and to dive right in, I'd like to introduce the best person to hear about fundraising from, Suzanne Hilzer-Wiles. And before she gets started, I'm going to just talk about why you should engage your whole team in fundraising, which is why we're all on the call. Why should everyone in your organization, not only in the development program, be aware and involved on some level? At the risk of sounding cliche, honestly, you're all in this together. So if your organization's development isn't hitting your target, then that might affect how many programs your program directors can coordinate, which then in turn can affect your clients and possibly even cause layoffs. So all of this could potentially be avoided or drastically reduced by having everyone participate on some level of fundraising. And Suzanne will now show us how to do that through organizational analysis, which is basically taking a look inside of your organization and seriously analyzing the strengths and weaknesses of each and every staff member so you can capitalize on what he or she can bring to the team.
Thank you so much, and yes, thank you so much for being with us, everyone. This slide is just a quick reminder that you may be at a small organization, but you are part of a very big industry, and you need every competitive advantage to get ahead. It is easier than ever for your donors to support causes they believe in around the world, so you need to use all the tools and resources available to you to make sure that you participate in as big a part of this bar graph as possible. So we're going to start on our next slide with an emphasis on knowing your teammates. And what we mean by this is taking some time to think about the skills of your development and non-development employees who will be good with your donors, who might be more effective in a supporting role, assessing how each team member can contribute to your overall fundraising goals, and thinking about who might be willing to jump in and be a part of it right away and who might need some coaxing. For all three of these first bullet points, it's really important to remember this is the time for an honest assessment of everyone's skills, challenges, and comfort level, because you want to build a development plan that really engages your entire staff but is reflective of who these folks are and how they might best help you reach your goals. The final bullet, it is essential to get buy-in and support from your CEO, is just a reminder that you don't want this to be treated as a nice add-on if people have time. This needs to be central and critical to their work, so their managers and the ultimate manager of your organization need to believe in that, need to tell people that this is a priority, and how they participate and support fundraising really needs to be part of the metrics that are looked at when assessing how effective are they at their jobs.
So now that Suzanne's given you kind of a little bit of a tidbit of performing an internal audit of your current development program, use this information to inspire all people, including both your frontline fundraisers on the field and those in the office cheering your cause. We'll talk about building the cheer pyramid through staff training and staff support, which is extremely critical to tapping into everyone's skills and interests so that they really will be motivated to extend beyond their typical job duties and to participate in fundraising in their own way. So we're going to start with team player criteria. And as you're performing your internal audit, you really are looking for what your development program looks like now and hopefully what it will look like or should look like. Before you can know what your program will look like, however, you need to know what your players should kind of have and bring to the team. You need to address questions such as, but what qualities does a fundraiser have, even if he or she has never raised a dime before? What really does an effective and successful fundraiser look like? Now, this could be applied to your organization. What do you consider a successful fundraiser, and what do others in your community consider a successful fundraiser? Just as some organizations consider a $1,000 gift as a major gift, what does your organization consider as attaining those big dollars? Keeping with the team analogy, these criteria, or tryouts, if you will, are pretty basic, but are still very, very important and pretty impactful on how successful your development program will be. First, of course, there's a basic desire to work hard and achieve goals and to always raise the bar, and then to believe in what you're doing. If you don't believe in the idea of charitable giving, how can you and your people in your organization convince others in the community to give as well? And this is something that, you know, is a very difficult situation, being not afraid of money or of talking about money. This seems kind of innate to fundraisers, and it's not necessarily true. You sometimes have to work at the courage to really have a conversation about some big money. Obviously believe in the institution and also be able to articulate, but most importantly, be able to listen.
So So first, thank you for the real-time feedback that I was a little hard to hear, and if I still am, please let me know. And if now it seems that I'm shouting, please let us know as well. In this Build the Team slide, I'm going to use a real-world example. I worked at, as we mentioned, a conservatory, and I recruited the dean and assistant dean of our School of Dance to be involved in fundraising, which was a fairly new thing to both of them. First, I asked them if they would be part of the fundraising for their school. They both completely agreed that that was a good use of their time, and we sat down together and had a discussion about what that would mean practically. How would we all interact? How much time would it require from each of them? And what were the tasks that they would each accomplish, and what would development do to support that, so that we went into it with a very clear understanding of everybody's role. That really follows with that develop a clear plan for engaging them in fundraising. And again, I talk about the supervisor again. In the dean's case, it was the chancellor of the university, so it was also making him understand how much of the dean's time would be used towards this effort, and him believing in that as a priority of the dean's time. Providing training when necessary, sample materials, and ongoing support is key. In the example of the dean and the assistant dean, we did everything from role-playing for particular asks when they were working with a donor who was new to them or a program they hadn't asked for support for before. We drafted letters. Sometimes they drafted letters for donors, and we gave feedback on that. And they came up with cultivation ideas, and we talked about those together. Who would those be most appropriate for in their donor pool? So it was a constant give and take. They would come up with ideas, we would give feedback, and vice versa. You need to be available for coaching and guidance and be prepared to take action with donors who need additional help. In this particular instance, they had a donor who was very engaged, came on a tour of the school and talked to some of the dancers and realized that there was a need for some late hours medical care. The dancers would get out of rehearsal late at night, and they told her that sometimes they had not really a minor injury, but needed to do some things to prevent injury. She wanted to give a gift and went to the dean and asked if she could give money so that they could extend the hours of our medical office on campus. That was not really a practical consideration for us. We're a small campus. We had one doctor. That person really couldn't be available until midnight. So the dean came to me and said, I like this idea, I like the spirit in which she wants to give this gift, but I can't accept this gift. And he knew enough that it's okay to say no. So he and I talked about how to redirect that gift. We looked at what the students had said to her. We talked to her about what support she wanted to provide, and realized that a lot of the student care could be accomplished, in this case, with an ice machine that was in the School of Dance. So we created, we purchased an ice machine. In this case, we put a plaque with her name on it because we thought she would get a kick out of that, and sent her a photo, because she lived in another state, of students holding the plaque with her name on it, surrounded by the ice machine, showing her that we appreciated that she wanted to support the students, but we needed to come up with a project that was actually more in line with what could be accomplished by the school. You want to give regular feedback to people in other parts of the staff, just as you would with your own development team. How are they interacting with donors after a donor meeting? How did it go? Were they clear? Were they articulate? Did they listen? Did they talk too much? Those are all the kinds of things you would work, the kind of feedback you would give to a new development officer. You want to do the same thing with program people. You also want to make sure that you celebrate successes with them. If you reached a project goal, you should reach out to every person who supported that in all ways and let them know that you were successful, you as a team. And finally, don't forget to say thank you and give credit. People are doing this as part of their job. Now you've asked that this be a clear expectation of their job, so you need to report back to them and to their supervisors when things have gone well and they have been part of the success for your organization. There are two key things we want to say about providing a foundation for success. The first is finding the right internal and external benchmarks to help define the program's goal and metrics. And this really means going beyond the budget goals. Hopefully, everyone has a clear idea of what are your income and expense goals for a year. But what you want to do is develop metrics that help make it clear how you're going to engage people, what your expectations are of them, and what their expectations for you should be. So, for instance, how many donors would you hope that a dean might help you be cultivating? Do they know who that list is? How often should they be reaching out to those people? Are there a certain number of cultivation events in a semester or in a quarter that you might like program officers to be a part of? The more you can lay that out and develop a clear plan with expectations, the more likely somebody's going to be to sign up and say, yes, I would like to be a part of that. Because, of course, they have lots of responsibilities outside of the work that they're doing in fundraising. Second, you need to define a niche that is uniquely suited to your resources, your culture, and your reach. How do you differentiate yourself in the competitive landscape in ways that will be understood by the staff and valued by donors? You want your staff members to be able to explain to people, whether it's in the hallway of your organization or in the aisle of their grocery store, why what you do matters and why your organization deserves their support. I'm going to use my example again from the conservatory at which I work to talk about recruiting new team members. First of all, everyone is a fundraiser, and as we go through the slides, we'll illustrate that more. Because every person who works for your organization is part of the experience that your donors have. Fundraising can absolutely begin with passion. It is your job as development professionals to help give people the tools and the understanding they need to turn that passion into success for your organization. Again, you want to ensure everybody understands the mission and the cause and can speak eloquently about this. And sometimes it's actually just helping people practice that. You can ask people, how would you answer this question about, why this matters? Could you explain to me in layman's terms why this scientific breakthrough you're working on will matter to people? Helping them take the jargon out of it, take the industry-specific language, will help them be much more comfortable and also effective as they talk to all of your constituents. The other thing I mentioned earlier is starting small. I went to the Dean of Dance because I had this idea that I wanted to develop a fundraising group associated with each of the art schools at the conservatory. I have a background in museum fundraising, and often museums will have sort of a friends of each of the departments. So friends of modern art, friends of photography. So I wanted to do that with the arts, with each of our art schools on campus. And the deans really hadn't had an expectation of fundraising in their jobs before. And some of them did it on their own. All of them were a little unclear about what that would mean for them. So it was met with reluctance. And I thought, rather than spend my time trying to recruit people to this who are uncertain, why don't I go with the one person who's already enthusiastic, develop a plan, and show people how this works, what it means for the use of his time, and how success can happen. And so throughout the year, we did what we said on the slide before. We celebrated success. We gave credit. And over that first year, fundraising for his school tripled. It had been modest before, but with his involvement, it tripled. And, of course, as you would imagine, the next year, all of the other deans were interested in talking about how they could do something similar in their own schools. So you don't have to start out with everybody. You can start out with a few people who maybe have the skills, experience, interest to go forward. So the steps for involving people, we'll just quickly go through what do we mean by these steps, because staff can help in every phase of the donor cycle. The qualification phase, of course, as you all know, is the process of identifying prospects and figuring out if they have the interest and capacity to support you. And you can ask every person on your staff to help figure out who they know, both maybe in some way connected to the organization or not, who may be interested and could become a donor. Cultivation involves engaging prospects in a more meaningful way so they understand you better and understand what will motivate them to their largest gifts. There are a number of ways that staff members can do this, including engaging donors directly, providing really really strong information about your programs to share with donors in building your case. The one thing I want to say here is don't get stuck in this phase. I work with lots of organizations who say we are wonderful at cultivating donors and we just never move them beyond that. When you have somebody who is identified as being in cultivation, you need to make sure that you have a clear plan for moving them to the next phase, the ask. And that's, of course, soliciting the gift. Your staff involvement may be direct. You may ask them to come to a meeting with a donor. They may actually do the ask. They may just be part of the conversation. Again, it's really important to understand what people are comfortable with and for people to feel confident that they can be honest with you about that. Or they may just be providing information before or after the actual solicitation to help the donor understand the impact of their gift. The final phase, stewardship, is further engagement of the donor, including thanking them and reporting on gifts and their outcomes. This can be as simple as having a program person thank a donor, to call them to thank them, to help you make sure that all of the things that are promised to a donor actually happen, whether it is their name on a room in that dean's school, whether it's a report that needs to go back to a donor about what happened with the space that was built out, letting people know introducing them to a program person who is now in an endowed position thanks to their generosity. This is the way that we build deeper relationships so that we can cycle people back, and of course is key to whether or not they're going to make additional gifts in the future, as you all know as development people, and this is a great way to engage your program staff.
And as Suzanne was talking about, and just to reiterate, here you'll see a visual representation of how your team can support the processes of identifying and cultivating, soliciting. Basically, once you identify and evaluate a prospect's interest, you also will understand their likely affinity and also their financial capacity. You can have all members of your staff proactively reach out and build their involvement. It's free to go out and talk to people. It's free to go out and have your staff educate others who may not understand what your organization's mission is, and then therefore kind of building support for engagement. And engagement, of course, is also known as the ask, where you also facilitate, connecting those likes, those interests with what your mission is actually about. So once you develop an explicit cultivation plan, you can orchestrate this opportunity to present a proposal, if you will, which is also known again as the ask, and then you negotiate and close, to borrow from some business terms. When you make the close, you also, it's not a dead end of the relationship. You need to maintain that relationship, and as Suzanne was talking about, stewardship is key to this part of the process. So as we're moving forward, and hopefully Suzanne and I are also following this, we are clearly communicating, and hopefully everyone in your organization is able to clearly communicate not only what their job is to do as part of the organization, but also as a greater whole. What is the job of the organization in your community, in your area, and in your world, basically. So as we move on, Suzanne will talk about and share some of the proven points of what motivates donors to give.
Sarah's going to walk us through some of the things each team member should understand in order to be effective in your fundraising effort, but here are a few things to keep in mind first. Again, does every single person on staff know what you are raising money for? Do they understand all of your fundraising initiatives that are happening now, as well as, of course, a real understanding of the mission of your organization? Can every employee tell why your organization is different from the competition? Clear communication can easily make a non-development staff member into a better fundraiser when they are on your grounds and off of your grounds. You want to provide internal communication materials and learning opportunities so that people really do understand all of the projects that are happening, particularly if you're doing things that are really visible in your community. So for instance, if you're having a special event and it is going to raise money for an upcoming concert at your performing arts center, make sure people really understand why that concert is special, why you're doing the special fundraising, why is it something that deserves notice in your community. Again, every single person, as they leave work each day, should be able to tell people articulately and with enthusiasm why the work you're doing matters, what you do with the money that is raised, and how would a gift make a difference.
And as Suzanne talked about, we actually have divided some of these guides into 3 playbooks is what we're calling them. And the first is to be compelling. And this is surrounding the idea of ensuring that your organization and your mission is compelling. I really think that this idea of being compelling is appropriate and an appropriate way to describe your cause, because it should be more than just, why is this organization a nice thing to have in my community, but not necessarily important or significant for me to become involved in. So you need to transfer that mode of thinking, that it is a compelling organization, it is a compelling mission. You need to reel the donors in with a message that really tugs on their heartstrings and ask, how will the cause make a difference in the world or for other people? And, really take it back to a personal level. If I make this gift, how will it make my life and my loved ones' lives better? Also, it's really important to not only worry about what people think in terms of giving a financial gift, but also how you will make people feel by giving a gift. And also what differentiates this organization from others. And I think that's really an opportunity for an organization to shine. Because let's face it, a lot of nonprofits now don't necessarily have a unique clientele or a unique audience or a unique mission even sometimes. But what really sets apart a nonprofit organization is the way that that organization puts all of these components together. For instance, if there are a lot of animal shelters in your community, you can set your organization apart from the competition just by showing that a higher percentage of money goes directly into programs like spaying and neutering to not only help abandoned homeless animals, but to prevent the further cycle of abandoned and homeless animals in the future. So as we move forward, we have come up with some visual ways that everyone in your organization can kind of look to see if they know anyone that fits these bills, if you will. What you see here in terms of capitalizing on the idea of our organization is being one that is compelling to a donor's value. Maybe this person feels that they feel obligated to join a board, or it's a community responsibility to become involved. Tap into these values just by sharing, what your organization can do to fulfill these needs, if you will. The second for the first playbook is demographics. Now, these are the basic building blocks that make a donor give. Age, as we all know, typically, as you age, you have experienced some additional opportunities, if you will, to give and to give more. So age can also enhance how your staff can talk to people and to bring them in. And then also, what is their situation with their family relationships? And of course, this all boils down to total wealth and what they are able to give. And then continuing on, we see here that there are some typical behaviors and habits of donors who give to a particular organization, like competitiveness and past philanthropic giving. And so what your development staff can do is try to help research, try to be a Sherlock Holmes in the community, get ideas for new donors and analyze what's going on in the community, who's giving to which organization, and just really to keep tabs on other donors and to stay competitive.
I would add here an example from my own experience. I worked in Manhattan for many years, and one of the organizations for which I worked had a community of donors who were from Wall Street. And there is a real competitiveness that comes out of that work environment, and we found that we could use that to our advantage with live auction. If we knew that we had one or two items that would be of interest to at least 2 or 3 of the investment bankers we had in our room, we could actually get a lot of activity going and drive up the cost of that because they wanted to show, I have a lot of money to spend on that. I have, I don't like to lose. And you can see that the Robin Hood Foundation in New York uses that to incredible advantage. So it's, now I live in the South. That would absolutely not fly there. So it's understanding your own environment and what are the behaviors and habits of your community, of the people who come to your events, and how can you use that to really make the most of your fundraising opportunities.
And I think, Suzanne, that's a perfect segue into our second playbook, which is to show relevance depending upon your community. This is an opportunity for your organization to combine forces internally and show how relevant you are. Of course, it goes without saying that every organization feels like they are necessary, but when you really think about it, what are the numbers or what is the data to back up your programs? What is the data or numbers to back up your constituents? Or ultimately, what is the data that comes from your outcomes? Essentially, everyone on your team can show how your organization is relevant by performing their daily tasks and their job responsibilities to show what would happen if your community if your organization wasn't there. I think this is important to look at it from the opposite perspective. What would happen, what negative occurrences would happen if your organization was eliminated the next day? That would definitely increase the ability to show how relevant and meaningful you are to a community. For instance, a couple of examples. What would hundreds of dogs and cats do? Would they be killed if there wasn't another organization similar to yours or your organization in particular? Would 75 children diagnosed with autism, where would they go with their families if they wanted to go for therapy and treatment? Would they have to go 145 miles to find a similar organization as yours? So really let the numbers speak for your organization and validate its presence in your area. It is basically up to each and every one of your staff to show the relevance of the organization and to validate its existence. And I think what connects and kind of gives this validation of cause is encouraging donors to see the relevance of relationships with your organization. Relationships are one of the strongest motivators of giving. We all know that it's not to be cliche, but it's really who you know. If I were to rate the scale of importance of these playbook slides, I personally would rank this as one of my highest. In my opinion, relationships are the truest foundation of fundraising. And of course, that's if you have a solid mission to build on. One way I think that your non-development staff could also get more involved in the fundraising aspect without actually fundraising is maybe to join a volunteer group or become involved in another organization so that he or she could engage with other people who are civically minded and have that basis to share. Again, I want to stress that, the more people you know, the more opportunities there are for donations, or so we hope to think. The third basis is, these are pretty obvious, but the reason some donors give are personal financial strategies. And at the top, you'll see tax avoidance, and what we mean here is really being able to capitalize on those tax-deductible donations. And we'll talk a little bit later about D-Day, or December 31st, as I call it, and talk about, how you can adhere to these deadlines, but really play up the idea that these financial strategies are something that everyone in your organization can talk to with their constituents and their people that they know. Motivating factors. How do we actually give a person to become a donor? Everyone can think of someone that can fit these bills. They have, basically, someone can say, that's a really, well, hopefully, a compelling vision. Or this is a really good one, guilt or gratitude. I know that there's some research out there that kind of questions the effectiveness of having donors give by guilt. And I know from a marketing standpoint, this is also kind of a curious situation. So I would err on the side of caution when using guilt to have someone make a donation. Of course, memorializing or honoring those who matter to them and have a connection to that organization obviously are a good fit. And leveraging or matching the gifts of others. A lot of times, as Suzanne mentioned, public recognition is a great motivating factor. And also, of course, if something is a deep and personal interest.
And again, I will use an example from my own life for this one. As I explained to Farah earlier, at one point in my life I was very sick, and the Revlon Run Walk benefits the doctor group that cared for me when I was ill. And so each year my husband, who is a theater producer married to a fundraiser, so a very effective fundraiser himself, participated in the Revlon Run Walk, and for the 5 years that he did that while we lived in New York, he was one of their top 10 fundraisers every year, and that's a pretty impressive feat because thousands and thousands of people participate in that. And he did that by reaching out with a very personal story of how my illness affected our family, affected our daughter, and how grateful he was to the community of people, including my doctors, who made our lives easier and in fact possible. And it just really resonated with people because he was genuine, because it was personal, and then because people, there were two groups of people. There were people who were with us during that journey ourselves who responded for that reason, and then there were people who could really recognize those emotions and that experience in something that happened in their own family or friend life. And those people gave generously as well. So that ability to connect people in really personal and heartfelt and genuine ways creates a lot of opportunity, not only for the person who starts that to be generous, but for them to inspire generosity in others.
And how can we inspire generosity urgently is kind of the basis for our third playbook. I think urgency is sometimes a really misunderstood concept, and especially because it is so subjective and relative to the time. But your organization's task is to show that not only is funding important, but funding is important right now. In that funding right now will help you to continue your important work, and the lack of funding right now will really cause some huge detriments to your constituents, your clients, and your community. So answer questions of why today and not tomorrow. If you and your staff are not able to answer these questions effectively, you are not able to convey the urgency that a dollar will make to your organization. What happens if you are promised money, if you're promised a pledge and it doesn't come through until 5 years down the road? What happens to your organization? Just even going, again, on a more personal level, how many more individuals' lives will be affected? How many more individuals' lives will be improved or saved? Or whatever your mission is, whatever your programs involve, how will this be affected if it doesn't get done right now? And are there organizational factors that impact timing, a matching grant that has a deadline, or, of course, the end of a campaign or the end of our fiscal year? And to give a few more visual examples of the third playbook are some trigger events. And of course, trigger events are the most sudden indicators of urgency and are really good indicators and examples of the willingness and ability of a donor to give. And as I alluded to earlier, I think that the most urgent time I can think of is the last day in our calendar, December 31st, or as I always called it in my organizations before, D-Day for donors, to get in their tax-deductible gifts to make it count for that year. The year-end deadline is also a good way for all staff, not just frontline fundraisers, to become involved in the LIBUNT process. Now, this is a term, just to give you a bit more of Fundraising 101, LIBUNT basically stands for last year, but unfortunately not this year. So these are the donors from previous years who maybe haven't given as of yet, and if it comes rolling around to December 1st, you can kind of gather your troops in your organization regardless of what their job responsibilities are, and have them all participate on some level to organize and to contact these libunts, if you will, so that they can become current year donors, basically by having that personal outreach. Something else that I wanted to note from this slide is that although your organization might think about who asks, as in who asks from the perspective of inside your organization, such as always having your CEO, your director of development, or your board president as the person who goes out and makes those big asks, consider looking from the perspective of outside your organization and how it fits within your community. And to give a little bit of background, I came to GG&A from Springfield, Illinois, which is a city of about 150,000 people. And when considering people to participate in making those big gift asks, there usually were always about 10 to 15 suspects that were always asked for a variety of organizations to ask their friends and colleagues for the big money. So look outside of those typical suspects. Look for perhaps a client, look for perhaps even a staff member that has been positively affected by your organization. That will really make a difference and, again, show your relevance and show how compelling your organization is. So when you add all of these factors up, all of these reasons why donors give, you understand that there are so many opportunities to engage someone with your organization. And this doesn't mean that there are so many opportunities just for your frontline fundraisers to engage. These are so many opportunities for everyone in your organization to engage a potential donor. These are all natural human characteristics and tendencies. So how do you apply this to your team? You basically gather your team as a group, everyone from the person that answers the phones to the CEO, again, highlighting the fact that this also has to have buy-in from the top leadership. And consider ways that they all can provide information, can provide research, and can help participating up to the actual ask, which they can also, of course, leave up to the frontline fundraisers. But this means that the whole team is building this foundation and providing support for the big ask. The ask, oh, sorry, go ahead, Suzanne.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think one thing I want to point out here is that we've talked about all the reasons that donors give, but the main reason we hear about why donors don't give is because they weren't asked. We work with a lot of really wonderful organizations, and when we're asked to look at an underperforming fundraising program or a piece of a fundraising program that is underperforming, and we do donor interviews, at least part of the answer, if not the entire answer, from the donors is always they don't ask often enough, they don't ask clearly enough, they don't ask regularly. So don't forget that donors, these are all the reasons donors will be motivated, but they're not going to actually give if you don't remember to ask.
So after you do make the ask, which is very important, and do not forget, how do you rev your audience? How do you pack the stadium? Meaning, how do you continue to engage them, and how do you continue to have them involved in something more than just a one-time gift? That is, again, through cultivation and stewardship, referring back to an earlier slide with the entire process of making the ask. In our last section right here, we'll discuss the importance of building and cultivating those relationships, which we know are great motivating factors to move someone from being just someone in your community to being someone who is a supporter of your organization. Suzanne's going to now tell us a little bit about how to start cultivating and how to start putting the pieces together leading up to the big ask and what to do after the big ask.
So the question is, where do you start? You start with an engaged, enthusiastic, and positive staff that understands your mission and how fundraising will help realize your vision. I would say that the most important part of that sentence is engaged, enthusiastic, and positive staff, because this is not just about fundraising. This is about a highly functioning staff overall that works well together and is creating value across your organization. They're producing high-quality programs. They're working together to maximize resources. All of those things make your organization stronger and make fundraising as a team possible. As you talk to staff members about how they can start being involved in the cultivation process, just remind them that every place they go, friends, family, neighbors, all of the civic organizations with which they're involved, those are all potential places to talk about your organization and to help people understand why it matters and to get people excited and engaged around supporting what you do. Cultivation is a great way to engage a wide spectrum of staff in ways that are a little less intimidating to some of the beginners. So, for instance, identifying those who have a connection or concern for your organization using the groups that were identified in our last slide. Uncovering a prospective donor's values, interests, resources, motivations. So that may be somebody on your program staff who knows one of your lower-level donors or a volunteer, or bring somebody new to your organization, but can help you fill out the picture of what's going to interest this person, what's going to motivate them, and what is their capacity to support what we're doing. Again, you set the stage for solicitation by first establishing a cycle of lower-level gifts, usually, ongoing stewardship, and sustained involvement. We all know that planned gifts often come from people who are lower-level annual fund donors. So when you think about cultivation and stewardship, you're not just talking about the people who might have a name on a building. You're talking about every person who's supportive of your organization, including your volunteers. You're orchestrating engagement aimed at both intellectual and emotional connection to your organization and strengthening your donors' knowledge about your institution using all of the people on your fundraising team to educate your donors.
And because we are running a little short on time, I did want to briefly go over some of these what we called red flag moments that Suzanne was talking about in terms of knowing how you can approach and steward and cultivate donors. These are the desire to be a volunteer, the desire to want to learn more about the organization or a particular project or initiative that your organization is embarking upon. Even something as small as signing up for a newsletter or joining your mail list. These are all ways that are natural opportunities for all staff members, regardless of their fundraising background or not, to get involved in stewardship and cultivation.
On this slide, game plan and stewardship, the words that I like to use with my own development staff members are gracious and grateful. Every person in your organization needs to understand, and this is from the person who is the receptionist to your CEO, that every person who walks through your door or interacts with your organization needs to feel respected, welcomed, and heard. And if you do that and you instill that culture in every person at your organization, then you are all being part of the stewardship plan. Obviously, there are times when you do a documented stewardship plan around a particularly large gift that really helps everyone understand their roles and responsibilities with clear articulation of both responsibility and timelines, but stewardship is also much greater than that. So you want to think about it in terms of a traditional stewardship plan as you would understand it in a major gifts program, but really, again, creating an atmosphere in which everybody feels welcomed and respected and excited to be part of your organization. The two most important points here are really the first. Again, everyone plays a role in a donor's experience, and I can't tell you the number of people who, when I worked in a museum, we had problems actually with co-check people at one of the institutions at which I worked. And, donors who had a wonderful experience and loved the galleries, if their first moments in the museum were struggle with getting their coat checked, it just really cast a pall on their entire museum experience. You really can't underestimate that. Good customer service starts at the front door and ends when people leave. and you are stewarding an individual, not just a gift. You hopefully are not going to get just one gift from these people. If you steward them well, this is part of an ongoing relationship that will involve many gifts over the course of their lifetime. Again, this is just a reminder. There are lots of ways that the whole team can say thank you. We've gone over some of these before, but this is a sort of easier, gentler way to involve people in fundraising at the beginning of their fundraising careers.
And as with any team, you need to start from the ground up and try to avoid overwhelming your players or cheerleaders with too much information. Gradually, both your non-development staff and your frontline fundraisers will start to learn their cheers and their playbooks, going back to our analogy, and learn how to really gel and work together. And I think the biggest thing to take from here is that you are all on the same team, and that practice makes perfect. And one of the biggest things that you can do internally is to appreciate and to say simple things such as thank you and to celebrate success. And speaking of thank yous, this is the time that we say thank you to all of you for joining us and for participating in our presentation. And now that we've given you a little taste of how to recruit all of your staff members into the same team to fundraise, I'm sure that there are some questions, right, Catherine?
Yes, there is a question. The question was asked, how does our organization address the issue of a group of donors who should receive more stewardship?
I think that every organization struggles to create meaningful stewardship for their growing base of donors, especially the middle range. I think that by creating a plan that directly targets donors from this bigger middle section will help an organization to weigh the options of how to move that donor to the next level. I've known of some donors in my past that have contributed more money when given just a quick thank you call by a volunteer. And in this particular case, moving from a $1,500 gift to a $5,000 gift, just because of the gratitude that was shown by the people involved in the organization. And that didn't necessarily mean the person whom they had spoken with as the frontline fundraiser for the big ask. So I think really it's a matter of taking a look at your organization and, as we mentioned earlier, thinking about the small and quick and dirty ways that all of your staff can be involved in showing appreciation to donors through cultivation and stewardship.
And Farah brought up an important point there. Remember that you can use volunteer leaders. They are a wonderful source of thank you calls, thank you notes, and in fact, it's not just a good way for them to help you in cultivation, it's actually a great way to involve them and make them feel closer to the organization. I had recently had a volunteer who we asked to do thank you notes, and she got some thank you notes back for her thank you notes. People were so impressed that a board member had done that, and it just made her feel so great about her work with the organization. So it was not only a great help in stewarding the donors to whom she reached out, but in fact it was a stewardship opportunity with her as well.
And I think that wraps up our time. I apologize for some of the technical difficulties that we experienced at the beginning, giving us a couple minutes late start. But I do want to, again, say thank you very much for all of you who joined us this afternoon. And I wanted to highlight our next webinar, which is coming up on Thursday, February 22nd. Brad and I will be talking about how to get to know your donors through data and the important information you need to begin to segment your database and how to better understand your audience and honestly to avoid the urge to collect useless data for the sake of collecting data. We look forward to giving you tips, tricks, and techniques, so hopefully you will join us at the same time in the same place. And thank you, Suzanne, and to Catherine, and thank you for all of you for joining us. And we actually will be staying on the line, our chat, for the next 10 to 15 minutes if you have additional questions you'd like for us to answer, or feel free to email Catherine if you'd prefer, and we will be more than happy to email the questions and answers in an email to all participants. So thank you, and have a wonderful day.